The juvenile was snarling before the transport doors even opened, a hatchling of the Ravker species. Claws not yet dulled by training, eyes bright with unspent violence. It slammed against the reinforced side panels of its containment cradle, metal screeching with every impact. The receiving clerks at the Galactic Accord Foster Registry took one look at the cargo manifest and froze. Category read, Apex Carnivore, unbonded, no sedation, no restraints. The protocols were clear. Such beings were only to be housed in reinforced containment under constant observation by military-grade AI units. But that wasn't what the crate read. Coordinates pinged the human enclave sector. The administrative AI requested confirmation from the Central Archive, thinking it a routing error. It wasn't. Authority override, Class 7 clearance. Confirmed. The Ravker youngling was to be delivered directly to Human Foster Unit 109B. The AI stalled for 8 seconds, something it had never done before in centuries of operation. Then it dispatched the unit, watching silently as 2 drones carried the feral infant toward the human sector, its spiked tail thrashing like a berserker's flail. The rest of the registry staff gathered by the surveillance display. Whispers spread quickly, then speculation, then disbelief. No one said out loud, but everyone thought it. Who would entrust a Ravker hatchling to a human? Especially this one, barely hatched, already hostile. The last time a Trinac caregiver tried to manage one this age, they'd lost 2 limbs and a heart sac. Even cybernetic augmentation hadn't helped. And yet now, some anonymous authority had decided that a species known for hugging things would be entrusted with bioengineered predator. Unit 109 B was nothing special to look at, a dome barely larger than a cargo pod, wrapped in earth-imported pine and surrounded by crude fencing. No high-frequency emitters, no behavioral suppression fields, just open air and warmth. Inside sat a middle-aged human male, with gray in his beard and mismatched socks on his feet. A mug steamed beside him, marked with a crude hand-drawn Ravker skull and the words Little Monster Club. The containment cradle landed in front of him with a dull metallic clank. The Ravker inside hissed, locking eyes with the human. Instinct expected fear. It found none. Instead, the man rose slowly, knees cracking audibly. He approached the creature not like a handler, but like a grandfather seeing an old friend. "Loud one, aren't you?" he muttered, unlocking the crate with an override chip pressed against the panel. The AI on standby issued a silent warning, risk level critical, but the man ignored it. The hatch opened. The Ravker lunged. A blur of scale and fury shot forward, and stopped inches from the man's chest. He didn't flinch. He didn't lift a weapon. He just waited. The juvenile stared at him, muscles coiled. The silence stretched thin. Then the man extended a hand, scarred, calloused. Empty. The Ravker didn't move. The hand stayed out. No rush. No command. Just an offering. After 32 seconds of hesitation, the Ravker let out a confused chirp, tilted its head, and lowered its front limbs. Still tense. Still ready to strike. But no longer attacking. The man smiled like he'd seen it 1,000 times before. "Welcome home, kiddo." It hadn't started as a program. There were no grand announcements or high-level negotiations. Just one desperate Ravker mother who refused to accept that her hatchling would become another casualty of genetics and tradition. She had seen what happened to the others, locked in neurosuppression chambers, medicated into docility, eventually disposed of when they failed to meet cooperative criteria. She went off-grid, ignored the counselors, and through a shadow broker, reached out to a human civilian, not a scientist, not a diplomat, a former schoolteacher from Earth named Dr. Leah Morgan. The request had been simple. Take him. Raise him as if he were yours. Teach him what we cannot. No one expected her to succeed. The Ravker had been deemed untrainable, feral by design. Even the Accord's top behavioralists gave up after 2 weeks. But Morgan said yes, packed her bags, and moved to a modified orbital pod with nothing but a heat lamp, a trunk full of children's books, and 2 decades of early childhood education. She named the hatchling Thatch. Not a number, not a designation. A name. When he tried to bite, she wrapped his tail in soft cloth and rocked him. When he hissed and postured, she mirrored him, Without mocking, without flinching, she taught him to speak in 3 languages, then taught him how to say please in each of them. When he had night terrors, she didn't sedate, she sang old Earth lullabies in a cracked voice. And when he finally curled into her side during a storm and whimpered instead of roaring, something shifted. The Accord only noticed when her quarterly report was filed, not by Morgan, but by Thatch himself. Typed in imperfect grammar, it read, "I think I love my human. She sees me, not just my claws." The file triggered a minor scandal. Security audits were launched. A full tribunal was scheduled. But it never happened, because 2 more Ravker mothers had already requested human placement. Then 5, then 11. No one understood what was happening, only that it worked. Juveniles once marked for containment began returning. Socialized, fluent in trade tongue, often quoting her philosophers. It turned out the Ravker weren't broken. They were just misunderstood. Aggression wasn't random. It was fear amplified by isolation and centuries of inherited trauma. Other species tried to suppress that fear. Humans embraced it. By the end of the second cycle, the data was undeniable. Hatchlings placed with humans had a 91% reduction in violent outbursts, a 70% improvement in cooperative behavior, and, most curiously, a newfound fondness for human food. One report noted a Ravker's obsession with peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, which it referred to as prey that hugs. Morgan never asked for credit. When asked why it worked, she only shrugged. You can't teach a child to be kind by punishing them for being scared. You teach them by being what they need, calm in their chaos. Thatch now served as the youngest ever Ravker diplomat. His first act? Requesting a statue for Morgan in the Accord's central plaza. Not one of stone, but of carved wood. Just like the furniture in the little dome she called home. Within 5 galactic cycles, the trend became something more than a curiosity. It became doctrine. The galaxy's most dangerous species, those who once scoffed at emotion and shunned human softness, began quietly lining up to place their young in human care. It wasn't limited to the Ravker anymore. Velcaran flyers, whose Talon-born young once shredded containment nets midair, were now seen dozing peacefully in Earth-made hammocks. The Fennec Talon birds, notorious for attacking anything larger than them on sight, were caught on surveillance tucking themselves under human arms. Even the Lyric spawnlings, entities composed of flickering flesh and pure rage, showed measurable reductions in chaos activity after only 3 months in human proximity. A galactic journalist from the Noran Consortium began compiling reports. She traveled to 17 different worlds and spoke to dozens of species, each carrying a version of the same story. The first was from a Velcaran elder who remembered the old wars. "We once thought humans were delicate," he said, "but only the very strong can be gentle in the face of danger. And humans, they are relentless in gentleness." A Fennec war mother admitted she had once nearly started a feud when she found out her youngling was placed with humans without her consent. "I was furious," she said. Then she came home and asked me if I was proud of her. She had never asked that before. I cried until my feathers molted. An interview with a Trinac military official proved even more telling. He recalled a juvenile Ravker in the middle of a blood rage on a training world. The creature had already injured 3 cadets. But just as lethal force was authorized, a transmission came through from its human caregiver. Just 2 words. "Breathe, Thatch." The juvenile stopped mid-charge, curled its claws inward, and began to sob. Not out of fear, out of recognition. Someone had taught it that pain was not its only option. The journalist concluded her report with a strange observation. Humans do not dominate through power. They disarm through presence. In a galaxy ruled by instinct and status, they speak the language of safety. By now, Earth had become a destination, not for war, not for conquest, but for growth. Elite alien families sent their most volatile children not to military academies, but to human families in the quieter parts of the world. There, in places like backwater towns, old farmhouses, or orbital stations run by retired teachers, the galaxy's nightmares became curious children with favorite bedtime stories. Galactic officials could no longer deny the trend. Charts showed marked declines in juvenile crime among predator-class species. Conflict resolution increased. Even vocabulary complexity improved, especially in emotional expression. It turned out no one had ever taught these children words for sadness, comfort, or hope until humans gave them those words. They weren't being tamed. They were being understood. And that made all the difference. The galaxy, for all its tech and might, had finally found its true caregivers. The species too stubborn to give up, too strange to fear monsters, and too human to walk away. The Ravker general stood before the Accord Council in full ceremonial armor, her scales dulled by age and battle. She had once fought humans, had called them inefficient, primitive, reckless with emotion. Now she stood not as a skeptic, but as a witness. Her voice carried no ceremony, only truth. "We believed humans would make our children soft," she said. "We were wrong. They made them whole." Across the chamber, data flickered, graphs, reports, testimonial from hundreds of species. The numbers were undeniable, but what silenced the room wasn't data. It was a recording she played, a youngling, once violent beyond control, laughing. A human voice off-screen said, "It's okay. Try again. I'll wait." The laughter continued. Not wild, not aggressive, joyful, playful, alien and childlike, and utterly safe. A representative from the Uxlorn matriarchy, a race with no concept of family bonds, stood to speak next. Her people had only ever known strength through detachment, yet her voice trembled as she described what happened after assigning her hatchling to a human home. She came back and asked if I ever felt lonely. I didn't know how to answer her, but she hugged me anyway. By now, entire orbital schools run by human instructors had begun operating. They taught not math or military history, but patience, kindness, and empathy. Earth's oldest parenting techniques, lullabies, physical affection, unconditional support, were being translated and archived in the Accord's central database, not as cultural trivia, as essential education. Humans were no longer the awkward, underestimated species trying to catch up. They were something else now, something no simulation had predicted. The protector species. They didn't lead fleets. They led minds. They didn't conquer through fear. They conquered by convincing the galaxy's deadliest beings that they were worth more than their instincts. That rage didn't have to define them, that they could be more if someone stayed long enough to believe in them. A new Accord protocol was drafted that day. Proposal H7, certification of humans as galactic nurturers. Not symbolic, official. Human caregivers would be recognized, funded, and integrated into foster systems of over 70 predator-class species. At the ceremony, they asked Morgan, the teacher who started it all, what she thought about the proposal. She smiled and sipped her tea. "I just gave them what every child needs. A second chance. And someone who won't give up when they bite." Her first foster child, Thatch, now a diplomat in his own right, stood beside her, not as a soldier, not as a weapon, but as proof, because in the end, the galaxy hadn't just learned why the predators trusted humans with their young. It had learned something far more terrifying, that the one species too soft for war, too emotional for politics, and too irrational for logic was the only one brave enough to love a monster and call it family.